Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. All the WCAA organizing committee and all the colleagues and delegates that are present and everyone else. Good afternoon in Lisbon time, good night or good morning, depending on where you are. We're having this WCAA roundtable, or a roundtable that is WCAA sponsored and organized at the EASA Lisbon 2020 conference. And thank you very much for everyone who's present and willing to participate. So basically what we wrote for as abstract for this roundtable was a simple text saying that in a contemporary world where regimes defending a turn to social inequalities, forbidding the circulation of refugees and immigrants and are thriving, individuals are arrested or persecuted for defending the rights of the minorities. Anthropology as a discipline is also under attack. In the midst of a deplorable general disregard for the social sciences, many countries' governments refute the legitimacy of anthropological reflection and action, often using justifications related to the discipline's past and confusing a scientific discipline with ideology. This has been happening under various forms and having as trigger in numerous issues in multiple countries all around the world. This roundtable, sponsored by the WCAA and APA, intends to bring together anthropologists and discuss these issues while joining efforts and trying to come up with possible future ways of action. Without further ado, I will give the word, first of all, to our colleague and president of WCAA, Carmen Rial. Please, thank you so much. I'll unmute myself. No, I'll mute myself, sorry.
That's right. I'm going to talk about pandemonium, and the anthropology in Brazil. This is a very informal roundtable. We expect to have contributions from different countries. Pandemia refers to the coronavirus. The global pandemia hits Brazil very strongly. We have spikes every week. Pandemia is global, but do not have universal effects. It hits especially the vulnerable, the ones with precarious lives, some of our interlocutors. Pandemonium, it's our crisis inside the global crisis, refers to the political situation, to the rise of the extreme right and its consequences. 10 years ago, Brazil was a left-wing success story. The Workers' Party generous cash transfer programs for poor families helped to lift millions out of poverty. The economy grew and arrangements were reached to push for change within the existing political constitutional structure. It was not a paradise. We had criticisms of the development program of PT, but it's much better than now. During this period, anthropology was very influential. We met ministries personally. We have had an influence on public policies in various sectors, from Quilombo communities to Indian reserves to children protection legislations, etc. We had already been influential during the writing of the Constitution in 1988, but we remained in relative invisibility in the media. This changed with the election of Bolsonaro. Who is Bolsonaro? Our tropical Trump. He's a low-ranking military, a mediocre far-right politician, elected several times to the Congress with the support of militias. How did he got to be a president? To understand, we need to go back to 2010 and his campaign against what he called the gay kid. According to his fantasy, the government intended to distribute pornographic materials in kindergartens and elementary schools, books, baby bottles imitating sexual organs, etc. Part of the media became interested in the congressman's story and gave him spotlights. Who do not want to protect children against perverse leftists who want to change the sex of the children? The social media, boosted by Cambridge Analytica, disseminated the campaign against the gay kid and Bolsonaro's racist, homophobic, xenophobic statements. The academics, we took him for granted. He was too grotesque, too dumb to be taken seriously. We did watch carefully the rise of conservationism in parallel with the spread of the new Pentecostal church in a historic Catholic country. The evangelicals, not the classic evangelics church, the new Pentecostals, voted decisively in Bolsonaro's favor in 2018. The strong reaction against the Work Party did the rest. 11 million people voted blank, enough to give him the victory. And the pandemonium settles in the country. An extreme right that has never before in history had the courage to assume its values does so now, and with transnational connections. Robert Bennett, Trump, Netanyahu, accusers of the gender ideology, anti-globalist, those who say coronavirus is a Chinese invention, and let's not forget the earth planists, those who believe the earth is flat. It has many characteristics of the fascism, as Humberto Eco defined it, but it's not nationalist. The slogan used during Bolsonaro's campaign, Brazil above everything, God above everyone, it's not exact. Bolsonaro demonstrates with flags of Israel and United States in his hand. Their biggest enemies have been named the anthropologists. Sure, also the university in general, which according to our former minister, is a place of sexual orgies and drug trafficking. But anthropology is the main target. And who is the anthropologist in the country? Well, we have different schools of anthropology, you name it, culturalist, structuralist, post-structuralist, perspectivism, ontological turn. We have 20 graduation courses and more than 10 undergraduation courses in anthropology, most of them in social anthropology. What's important to underline is that even more theorists have a public voice, a political engagement. The university gives degrees to 2,000 new anthropologists every 4 years. So this is the people who the government is not interested in allow our talk. The research in human science is threatened. Funds are reduced, and the funds are most needed right now. But field work requires time, funds are no longer available. And anthropology is the main target, as I said. Without affirmative action, we will have Indians and Black students. The colonized and marginalized voices are going to be still heard. Are the university going to be for an elite as in the past? Maybe for men, since Bolsonaro and their evangelical voters think that women should go back home taking care of the children. Well, I do not have a response. The anthropologists don't have response, but we have strong academic associations that are fighting back and with relative success. What are the possible future actions? Well, our job is more important than ever, and we have to find ways of keeping it, doing it. We have to find new formulas. Webinars, maybe it's one possibility. A union, as in the panel yesterday, maybe a global union of anthropologists, it's a possibility. Brazil, it's not an isolated case. We have many things in common with Poland, Hungary, and other countries. And I would say that even now, with this terrible situation that are hitting Brazil, we still have maybe a better situation than many European countries that are extinguishing their anthropology departments, like France, for instance. Well, that's what I have to say for the beginning of our talk. Clara?
All right, thank you very much, Carmen, for this insight into the tragic Brazilian situation. Like you said, unfortunately, it's not only Brazil that is under dictatorships to be, well, they're not dictatorships technically, but so Gordon, please.
Okay. This panel is on the threats that anthropology faces from governments around the world. And it does indeed face threats from a multitude of governments, as we just heard from Carmen in Brazil and many other places as well. However, I think it's fair to say that the threat faced by anthropology in Hong Kong is probably most clear of any at this immediate point.
The threat faced in Hong Kong is remarkably clear. And that's because as of July 1st, 2020, a new law was passed, the National Security Bill, that makes a number of different entities into crimes. Advocating secession of Hong Kong from China is a crime. Subversion, whatever the hell that may mean, is a crime. Terrorism is a crime, but so too is collusion with foreign forces. Now, I happen to have an American passport. If a student says, "Professor, what do you think about Hong Kong independence? Is that collusion with foreign forces?" We don't know, because the law is so vague that we cannot tell. This is a real problem because without knowing how this law is going to be applied, we all are in a state of considerable confusion. I suspect that the law is primarily going to be applied most immediately to people like Joshua Wong, people like Jimmy Lai, people who have advocated for protests in the streets. But nonetheless, the way it's worded, it may well come after us all. Now, I myself have been active in protests in the last year, as have a number of my colleagues, but that may not be the threat. The threat may be simply whatever we say in the classroom. For many disciplines in the academic world, it might not be a problem to have a law like this. If you teach music, if you teach engineering, if you teach medicine, this kind of stuff is unlikely to come up. But anthropology is one of maybe half a dozen disciplines that is intrinsically based in critical thinking, in the ability to criticize the political order, the economic order, the social order that one lives within. That's the essence of anthropology. And if you can't do that, it's not anthropology anymore. My sociologist friends, my friends in journalism worry about the same thing, but this is a relatively small number of disciplines. Now, one may say, wait, China has anthropology. Why can't you just be more like China? But it's worth remembering that anthropology in China is a fundamentally different matter. It's set up primarily to investigate minority nationalities. The 56 minority groups that are within China, anthropologists are supposed to study them and have their data be used by the government. And several of my Chinese academic friends tell me that you better praise the Communist Party in your research grants or you may not get the grant. It's a rather direct matter. I've known anthropologists doing things that are aiding the government very overtly, and they think that's fine, as opposed to an anthropologist elsewhere who might say, well, no, we can't give up our informants for the sake of the government. So is Hong Kong expected to become like Hong Kong, like China in its anthropology? Well, not yet, but that's the immediate issue we face. And I'm facing this personally. I'm teaching a class called The Culture of Hong Kong this fall. How can we not talk about protests? How can we not have students advocating independence as well as advocating a deeper return to China? This is what anthropology is all about. You've got to think critically about this stuff. And what's going to happen here? Well, we don't know. It's going to be quite interesting. Under the anti-subversion law, theoretically, anybody violating the law can be taken out of Hong Kong and locked in a mainland prison for life. Now, I doubt that's going to happen to me. I think there's a small but non-negligible chance that I will be arrested or deported. But, you know, in Hong Kong, the way the law works is you might get arrested and put in jail for 3 or 6 months. It's unlikely to be so long, but we don't yet know how much the mainland is going to act upon this law. And so the great worry becomes that of self-censorship. And I have been telling my department here, that's the worst thing we can do, because a law gets set up and then the government doesn't need to censor you. You can censor yourself. My own personal belief, I don't give my opinions in the classroom, no. It's instead to give a multiplicity of opinions and let students think for themselves. That's the essence of education. That's what we're supposed to be doing. And we'll see what may happen here. It should be quite interesting to see what comes. Now, I myself am only partially worried. I'm supposed to become professor emeritus as of August 2021. And my wife and I joke, if you go to jail before then, they're not going to do that for you. You're done. I think I probably will be okay. I worry much more deeply about my younger colleagues. What's going to happen to anthropology in Hong Kong? Because I think over the last 10 or so years, we have emerged as a real center of global anthropology of East Asia. Now, we may die as an academic endeavor, but much worse, we may die as an endeavor telling truth to power. I hope and pray this doesn't happen, but this may be what we face. Thank you.
I'm Virginia Dominguez, University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, also a member of the organizing committee of the WCAA, a member of all sorts of things. But I want to say just a couple of things, and then I would like to bring in Ed Lebo, who is also here. I think together we can probably describe the situation in the US better. My main thing, you all know a lot about Donald Trump, and probably a lot of that come to you in various ways about the US. But what I wanted to say was, I think it is a serious mistake to actually think that the issue is Trump. I think the issue is that, I don't know, 40%, 35 to 45% of the US population that actually thinks Trump is great, that voted for him, and that may very well, don't be shocked, but that may very well by him get him elected again. Most anthropologists I know are unbelievably strongly anti-Trump. There may be some I don't know. We have, I don't know, probably 15, 20,000 anthropologists in the US. Not all of them are members of AAA. The archaeologists who are trained in anthropology departments are often not a member of TRIP, and that is especially the case with biological anthropologists. But we all experience this thing where we basically, it's what Gordon was talking about, not with the China system as well, is a serious, shall we say, lack of valuing of any field in the humanities or the humanistic social sciences that call into question any system. And so anthropology is often considered to be both fascinating and totally irrelevant, and at best or worst, depending on your position, it is also considered to be far, far on the left. So that has been the case for a long time. It's not new. But, you know, in many, I would say this is a very split society, but this is in some ways a society that is very conservative. A lot of it is very conservative. Trump's numbers, the polling numbers might be down, but even at 38, 39%, really a lot of Americans are actually giving him approval ratings. So anthropology works against the grain. Never know which of our students thinks what. I do sometimes, I try not to be political. I teach anthropology the way most anthropologists, I think, in this country do it, and that is basically we teach what our research has done. We teach what anthropologists have done in the past and in the present, and very little of it corresponds to what that conservative part of the U.S. Wants. And so it's not just Trump, it's them. Ed, you want to add anything, or do you want, Ed Lebo is executive director of the American Anthropological Association. So Ed, can you?
Good morning, everybody. At least morning where I am.
Good morning where I am too. Quite
I'm
early.
really pleased to see you all. I don't know exactly where to begin, but I'll talk about our view from the National Association
Right.
perspective and the role that we have. We have what I like to call superpowers, 4 of them, and I think that this can extend to the World Council and indeed to the World Anthropological Union as well. We have the power to set standards of responsible professional conduct. So a standard setting power is one of the things that as an association, I'm always humbled that people actually pay attention to what we say when we issue statements about professional responsibility, codes of ethics, statements against sexual harassment, and so forth. A second superpower we have is a convening power, that is the ability to bring people together through conferences, meetings, webinars, and through our publications as well. A third thing, power of ours, is to set the standards for intellectual rigor and quality through the editorial and curatorial activities that we undertake. And finally, we have the power of voice, that is to amplify the voices of individuals. And when we focus at the American Anthropological Association on all of these things, but in this context, I think it's our convening power and the power of voice that are especially to be emphasized. Not everything that anthropologists can do to advocate on behalf of public support for research, public support for higher education, public support for the policy positions that are informed by our research and scholarship needs to be done by the association. Some of that is really best done by individuals through their institutions and organizations, but we are able to bring people together to exchange ideas where you can, we can all come away from those convenings with promising sounding approaches that will work through our organizations. And some of the things that we do, indeed, we as an association, it happens that, not a coincidence, but our association headquarters are in the national capital, Washington, D.C., and I spend a good deal of my time at the U.S. Congress and in the offices of the executive agencies and talking with people about the findings of our research that are directly relevant to the practical real world problems that they're trying to solve through legislative and regulatory means. And so there are some things that we as an association can do on our own, but most important in this context, I think, are the things that we can do through alliances with one another and the active support of the constituent associations with the WCAA, with the World Anthropological Union, and with regional groups like EASA, I think are terrifically important in putting the spotlight on the work that we do and its ability to provide a context within which important policy decisions get made, and also specific findings that are relevant to assessing the effectiveness of various policy interventions. I have to say, Carmen, listening to you talk about Brazil, I'm so dismayed. I know about the rise of authoritarian regimes in Brazil, in Hong Kong, and elsewhere around the world. Maybe it's just some personality defect of mine, but I'm actually optimistic about our future and the insights that we are able to bring that will help win the day. I do believe, you know, in the midst right now here in North America of the pandemic response, that people are crying out for systematic observation, for science, for some consistent prescriptive guide to how to act, and they turn to the government for this. The government's performance in our case has just been abysmal, but there is cause for hope if people would simply you know, tune out the noise at the top and pay attention.
Wait, Clara, can I ask him something? Hi. It's not a personality defect, but you always see the bright light, and I don't always see the bright light. Let's put it that way. I call myself a cautious optimist, but do you think in your position, I mean, you probably have your hand in all sorts of things, but do you think that universities in the US are going to shut down anthropology departments?
Oh, it's already happening. You know, I think unlike some of the other national systems that that each of you represent, you know, there is a proliferation of institutions of higher education. There are in the U.S. 650 degree granting institutions at the bachelor's, master's, or PhD level, and I think that in many cases there have been financial difficulties that some of these institutions have. You know, even the ones that are in name a state institution, say like Virginia's University of Illinois, Illinois being a state in the United States, I think that its operating finances are down below about 12% of all of the operating budget coming from the state. The rest comes from research grant overheads and from tuition and from athletics, yes, or medicine. So it's the, you know, it's the market economy run wild in the higher education. So these institutions that are already in a position of financial vulnerability are having these vulnerabilities made worse by the pandemic. And we're already seeing just in the last 3 weeks, you know, the 1st of July in the United States is the beginning of the financial year for many institutions of higher education. And so there are budgetary decisions being made to eliminate programs that the, you know, the boards of trustees who are responsible for these decisions feel are not what we would consider job ready courses of study, and anthropology is often classified as something that is nice to have, but not necessary. So unfortunately, I think, you know, there have been half a dozen of these programs that have been eliminated just in the last 3 weeks, and I expect there to be many more. I know that the political economy of higher education is very different in the United States than it is in other places, but we're very worried about the elimination of these major degree courses.
Thank you. I just wanted to add one thing that I have not seen discussed, at least in the many EASA panels or sessions that I have been at. I think part of the problem, certainly in the US, but I also think here, and maybe elsewhere, is that it's not just the government, but a lot of the public, including the parents of a whole lot of our students, favor STEM fields or business. They don't think, you know, anthropologists can get jobs. They think accountants get jobs. They think people studying engineering get jobs, but they don't think anthropologists get jobs. And so a lot of our students, not only here at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, but in lots of places, will basically double major. so that they satisfy their parents with some field that they don't necessarily like, but that they can at least say, you know, I majored in that so I can get that job. So I think it's partly a general public thing. It's not just a governmental thing. And anthropology has in the past had its moments like this. It has had some better moments, but it's not, again, it's not really just Trump and his advisors. I think a lot of the country actually shares this. And so it's partly that I think we're both talking about. Anyway, I'll be quiet.
Okay, thank you so much, Virginia and Ed. I was thinking that we should, you know, open the floor to, you know, to whoever wants to talk. And it's very interesting to get the insights from the colleagues from different countries. And I thought, I don't know if Junji is there, if he wants to say something, because for him it's kind of late. Are you there, Junji?
Right.
Yes,
there,
I'm here. It's not late at all.
No.
Well, it's only 11 o'clock. Okay. Well, I've been listening to the situations in the world, in the other corners of the world from you, and I was thinking in what situation I am, in what situation we are, because in a sense, we are in a very different circumstances. And on the other hand, I feel that we are in the same kind of situation, in the same kind of global situation. I'm sorry, I should introduce myself because there are some new people here. I'm Junji Koizumi. Well, I'm a professor emeritus of Osaka University, and I'm currently the auditor of the National Institute of the Humanities. It's a collection of all national institutes in the humanities, including history, literature, linguistics, anthropology, and so on. Anyway, I am attending here as president of IUAS. IUAS is one of the two chambers of WOW, and the other chamber is WCAA, chaired by Carmen. And I happen to be chair of the WCAA a few years back. All right, now going back to the world situation and the situation in Japan, I know that East Asia is in a very unstable situation. You know, it's Japan is a neighbor of Hong Kong, China, North Korea, and Taiwan, and the borders in the sea are almost not violated, but tried by Chinese force almost every day. You know, they are hovering around, the military ships are hovering around, trying to claim some kind of territorial or ocean claims. Anyway, and that's just one thing. And Japan is not an exception, and East Asia is one of the most unstable area in the world right now. But within this island, in this island called Japan, people are not so much concerned with that situation, and things are very different. Although we feel the problems in the world. For example, the Trump administration is very important and also influencing a lot on the future, economic and political future of Japan. But one strange thing is that Prime Minister Abe, the political leader, is not like Trump or Bolsonaro or anybody else. He is just a best friend of Trump. is the best friend of Trump, and it's written in that Bolton's book, Bolton's new memoir. And Prime Minister Abe was the first person in the world who visited the US right after the election of Trump. And he was the first. Strategy is just to stick to Trump's policy and just try to secure the position to say something to Trump himself. And well, it may work in the sense that he has not received any outrageous demand, at least officially, from the American government. But on the other hand, this administration, the Abe administration, has not get anything at all from the US or other country. Abe has been working very hard on the diplomacy, but he was visible in diplomacy, but he didn't achieve anything at all during his tenure for many years. So that's the political situation. Now about the university and anthropology, again, it's a kind of strange, well, it's threatened in a sense, but we don't feel that we are not threatened so much. We have close to more than 700 universities, including small universities. And to begin with, we don't have too many anthropology departments or anthropology courses, but those courses are doing fine, and these courses have not been eliminated. Somehow, anthropology is a kind of popular, not so popular, but a kind of has a kind of force, some kind of unique force in our intellectual world. And one interesting thing is that recent development, there is something called new law, basic law. So the name is what was in that? Science and Technology Basic Law. This is the most important law in regards to science, technology, universities, academy, and so on. And this has been just being reformed, being renovated. And the most important change is that the humanistic sciences have been excluded from this law, science and technology law, because it's exclusive to science and technology. But now the humanities is being included in this very important law, which means that the humanities is going to secure a certain position in this academic world. And this is one change. And another thing, symbolic thing, is that the president of the University of Kyoto. University of Kyoto is one of the leading universities in our country. And the current president is an anthropologist and a primatologist. He's a student of gorillas. His research is, he's a field worker doing research among gorillas in Africa. And he's the president of that leading university. And at the same time, he was elected to the president of the National Council of National Universities. There are close to 90 national universities, and national universities are most important universities in our country. And he became the president of that council. He's at the top of all national universities or all universities. At the same time, he was elected the the president of the Science Council of Japan. Science Council of Japan is a Japanese academy of science. And this is very influential, and it's a kind of parliament of all academics, all professors, all scholars. And at the same time, these are three important top positions. And in addition, he is a member of something called CISTI, Council for Science, Technology, and Innovation. And this is the most important council making decision on science, the science and technology, and all intellectual activities. And this president of the University of Kyoto is a member of this council, together with the Prime Minister of Japan and other most important ministers, together with only a handful, only a few academics. So, so this is politically very, very strong feature for anthropology. He identify himself as anthropologist. So this is the kind of curious situation, current situation in our country. In a sense, the anthropology is threatened and not attacked, but it's not in a very strong position. But relatively speaking, I feel that we are in a better position as compared to other countries, other colleagues. So, but at the same time, I see a lot of sort of weaknesses and the problems with anthropology in this country, humanities in this country, and also political and economic circumstances of this country. Well, that's about it.
Thank you so much, Junji, for this very complete insight into the situation in Japan. I will now pass the word to our colleague from Argentina, Lia Ferrero. Lia?
Hi, hello to everyone. How are you? So nice to see you again. I had a question to Edward, but Virginia already answered. So I will, nonetheless, I will ask him the question, and then I will talk about a little bit what's happening in Argentina. I wanted to know is if what Edward was describing happened only with anthropological program, or if it was something that was happening with with other disciplines in the US. The question is if the attack is to anthropology or is the attack is to higher education in general. If we compare what he described about the US and what Carmen described about Brazil, in Argentina, during the last government, Macri's government from 2015 to 2019, we had a similar political situation with science, with what Carmen described for Brazil. We had budget cuts to science, but to not only to social science, but to science in general. Our principal institute of that founds science, CONICET, had a very high budget cut. It is also true that social science were particularly attacked during that period. We were called charlatans. We were supposed to just talk about, describe things that were not important to society. But that changed with the new government. I don't know if you know, now our Minister of Defense is an anthropologist, Sabina Frederick. She's an anthropologist and is the Minister of Defense of the country. But the general politics towards science has changed. But perhaps I think that what we should, as scientists, we should think about, or we should talk about, what are the relations inside the scientific field. Because amongst the scientific field, there are some beliefs that there are science that are more important and science that are less important. And perhaps we can discuss where is anthropology in that general scientific field. Perhaps before we confront the governments, before we demand more budget, more media participation, more participation in the public in general, we need to discuss where is that demand coming from? What do we have to offer, and what do we think of science in general? But not only social science or anthropology, science in general. In this pandemic context, in Argentina, our government is relying very strongly in scientifics before taking any decisions to define if we are going to continue the quarantine or not. They are constantly talking to scientists, epidemiologists. They are talking to epidemiologists, but they are also talking to social scientists. But what I mean is, we have to think about those relations between scientists, between science, inside science field, and Carmen said something about to create more solidarity or union amongst anthropologists around the world. Maybe we have to think that not only between anthropologists or amongst anthropologists, but in alianzas estratégicas, strategic alliance with other scientists. I don't know, that's what I wanted to say.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Leah. I see that Simone from the UK is asking a question here on the chat, if you can see. She has a question about how you see the WCAA taking a role in addressing some of the issues we've been discussing. What kind of role could it have? I thought that before passing on to Isaac, our colleague, we could have Carmen addressing this question that Simone just asked, and since she has to leave soon.
Well, any one of us can answer this question, but WCAA is a network that aims to promote a dialogue among the anthropology in the world. So it's a very important network. Give space to anthropologists in the world and give space to a debate in an anthropology. It's not really, and that's not only WCAA, it's also WOW, no, that Junji mentioned before. When I've talked about union, I mentioned something that was said yesterday. It was because they are thinking of defending anthropology as a professional that is being attacked, and it's being precarious profession for many young scholars. So I think that it doesn't overlap the role of the anthropology, the WCAA and the WAL. it would be something else, but it's open to. Isaac is going to speak next. He's the vice president of WCAA, so maybe he could complete what I just said.
Thank you, Carmen. I think that, you know, what Carmen said is totally correct. Any of us as anthropologists could probably answer this question of, I think we need to think as a whole, as a group. And I think both WCAA, IUAS, WOW, and other sister partner associations such as EASA or CF and others, as you know, have been very active in defending anthropologists' rights, especially in critical situations, as for instance, the situation, unfortunately well known, of our colleague in Iran who has been arrested, and other colleagues throughout the world. I mean, within the last 2 years, I remember we've written in numerous letters on behalf of people who have been arrested or not arrested, but mistreated due to their role as, like Virginia said, as critical social scientists, which is what we have to be, right? So let's have Isaac now. Isaac, can you hear us?
Perhaps in my contribution, I just want to start by saying that our young independent Kenya started off in the hands of an anthropologist. You probably know our first president, Jomo Kenyatta, was an anthropologist, and he wrote a very famous book called Facing Mount Kenya. Jomo Kenyatta himself was a student of Pronslow Malinowski. And in that book, he's basically addressing inequalities. He's addressing cultural inequalities and the differential nature in which the Agikuyu, that is the Kikuyu people, were being treated, and particularly the issue of female genital mutilation, where the missionaries had indicated and were enforcing the rule that if a girl went through that rite of passage, then they were not going to be admitted to school. And because of that, the rural communities started what we call the independent schools. So we see Kenyatta really taking up the role of anthropology and, you know, playing out the role of an advocate, talking about and talking against inequalities. But in 1963, when he took over, he really never talked much about anthropology, in spite of the fact that, you know, during the struggle for independence, he brought these issues and the issue of inequality up all the time. And therefore, from 1963, anthropology took a relatively, you know, a laid-back position until sometime in 1985. Kenyatta himself died in 1978, and we had a new president take over, who himself faced a coup in 1982, which was unsuccessful. But from 1982, after the coup, we see a turn of the style in which the president was handling issues. He was facing rebellion within his ruling party, and of course, political, you know, a disaffection within the country. And so with this rebellion starting, the president turned to anthropology. So in 1985, he ordered that anthropology be offered as a discipline in our oldest university, the University of Nairobi. And therefore anthropology comes in because he was saying, I think we need to understand our cultures, we need to understand where we're coming from, and we need to address issues that were facing us as a nation using anthropology as a tool for, you know, understanding the difference, the cultural difference amongst our communities. but I see the turn to anthropology as, you know, a way of trying to deal with the growing disaffection that he was facing within the country. And therefore, from 1985 all the way to around 2000, you know, anthropology had a relatively high profile within government, but also in the universities. And indeed, a number of universities in the country, you know, did start programs of anthropology. Then in 1982, we get our third president, who is an economist. And we start at this point seeing an onslaught on anthropology. And I remember at one time, the highest ranking member of government in the Ministry of Education, that is the minister himself, saying that anthropology had no role to play. This is a minister talking about the fact that anthropology has no place in modern Kenya. And therefore he's talking with authority, he's talking from, you know, a seat of power. And from this time, we started seeing, first of all, a lot of political statements made against anthropology in particular, but also against the social sciences in general. And this same person who talks against anthropology as a minister of education later on becomes the deputy president of the country. And he expands his war against anthropology to also include other disciplines like history, like sociology, saying that they have no role to play in modern Kenya, that what we need are people who can come and connect your electricity, people who can connect your water, people who can, you know, bring food on the table, you know, people who have done agriculture, medicine, that anthropology did not have a role to play. And therefore, we see this relative animosity to anthropology from those in power increasingly in current debates. And we even see it in terms of the manner in which the government responds to, you know, issues and challenges that the country is facing. For example, COVID-19, when the government was putting together a team to address the issues of COVID-19, there was not a single social scientist put on that team. It's until much later when, you know, some of us made noise and, you know, started asking why there was no social scientist, when, you know, government wanted people to go for testing and nobody was going for testing. You know, there was a reluctance from, you know, from the people to go for testing. That's the point at which they turned to us and asking us, what is happening? And of course, the issues that, you know, people are reacting to had to do with the manner in which the government started addressing COVID-19. You know, anytime somebody reported that there was, you know, a suspected case, they would come like, you know, they are coming to pick some hazardous material. They would come, you know, in full PPE with sirens, you know, and they will come clear everybody from the compound and take them into quarantine. And because of that, people started, you know, resisting the, you know, the efforts the government was putting in place to try and address the, you know, the COVID-19 pandemic. And therefore, as anthropology, we have seen this relative animosity from those who are supposed to provide a level playing ground. So perhaps maybe I just stop at this point and maybe take questions.
Ask a question or make a comment, but it's not just for Isaac, it's in general. I was thinking as I listened to all of us that it may not actually be a general thing about anthropology, but about what we do within anthropology. For example, when Junji was talking about this fellow who is president of the university and head of the Council of Universities, I think he said he was a primatologist. So maybe there as well as elsewhere, you know, primatology, okay, it's considered a branch of anthropology, but it's also considered a science. So I don't know, you know, and I'm thinking about South Africa. I'm thinking about China, what Gordon said about China. There is an anthropology there. It's just not the anthropology that some of us do. Before apartheid, there were two very different kinds of anthropologies in South Africa.
Yeah.
And one of them was very connected to the right wing, you know. So maybe the issue is not anthropology itself, but the kind of, what did Gordon say? The kind of critical thinking that we teach and do. So I don't know what Isaac said as well, you know, I'm thinking, okay, so an economist thinks certain things about anthropology, but maybe not about medical anthropology, maybe not about genetics, human genetics, which some people do. I don't know. What do you think?
I think you're right. In the past, we have a complicity with authoritarian regimes.
Yeah.
We have to think about the importance of the concept of race in the Nazism, or the importance of folklore in Italy with the Mussolini, fascism, or even in Portugal. No?
Right.
It was very interesting. The APA showed, the EASA, I don't know, showed fado in the beginning of our conference, but it was not a traditional fado. Fado is a Portuguese music, a traditional Portuguese music. It was a fado with young people making fun of their self by singing a fado. Well, why that? Maybe it's not, the people didn't get this, but for me, it's because fado was very much linked to the Salazar regime. So now, for us, it's a nice music, but they have to do it in another way. So I think you're right. Our ancestors have strong connections with authoritarian regimes. And right now, as Gordon said, China has a special anthropology, but that's not a widespread thing. Because like Brazil, you have archaeologists who are digging in Piauí. It's a state in the middle of the country. And they all are very critical with the government, because they are also being threatened by the lack of funds, the lack of interest in what they are doing. So, I mean, we cannot say primatology, archaeology are not threatened by these authoritarian regimes. We have to see every context and every case and every situation.
Quite true, Carmen. I completely agree with you. But this is Gordon Mathews from Hong Kong. But having said that, it is true that one can be a primatologist or an archaeologist and stay out of current political hotspots. Whereas as a cultural anthropologist, I suppose you can be involved in a particular society in a relatively remote place and not be, but most of us see ourselves as being involved. Now, the only caution I would give to you, Virginia, might come because of my own realization that if I were in the US, I might be seen as more right-wing than left-wing. Because I'm a standard liberal. I mean, I believe in all ideas being expressed and arguing them out, and maybe it's my own ridiculous faith, but I do think the best ideas will win through that kind of public discussion. That's not the way that some of my anthropologist fellows in the US seem to be thinking sometimes, although that opens up a whole other can of words. The important thing, though, I would say for anthropology is just that we must engage in a questioning of all of the social orders around us, because that's what we professionally do. We professionally are designed to make the familiar strange, to question everything. You cannot be a sociocultural anthropologist in the way that many of us think of the discipline without asking some uncomfortable questions. Now, whatever your own political orientation may be, fine. There's a lot of different ways questions can be asked, but I think that basic questioning spirit is what we really require as a discipline more now than ever before, because it used to be 50 or 100 years ago, anthropologists would go off to a distant place. Now much more. We are in a contemporary globalized world, and our role is to question that. And damn, let's keep doing that. I worry when Ed was speaking earlier about the difficulties faced in the US, because the US is the bellwether of global anthropology. But let's hope that as a discipline, we can continue in this questioning spirit, because it's absolutely essential that we can do this.
Gordon, I'm sorry, it's Virginia again. I think in the US, you would fit in perfectly well with the vast majority of anthropologists, not considered right-wing at all. Some people might think that you are too centrist, okay? And that they pat themselves on the back, they're progressive, whatever. But, you know, I don't know. I think what you articulate is probably what a whole lot of us do around the world. But that also explains why people who want to applaud the social order as it is would hate us. So, you know, there are some history programs or departments in various parts of the world. There are some literature programs, there are some philosophy programs that also do that. But I cannot imagine an anthropology, a social, cultural, linguistic anthropology, that does not see its mission as critical, as calling all sorts of things into question that some people don't want to see as called into question. But, you know, there are, what was it Leah was saying? There are some kinds of anthropology that are more acceptable to people in other fields. There are some sections of the anthropological community that probably are more easily brought into even fascist regimes. We may disagree with that, I don't know. But I think the vast majority of us really do a kind of critical social, critical thinking thing. We teach that way, we write that way, we do research that way. But if you think about what we're saying, I think most of us would then understand why any politician or any government that seeks to promote the social order as it is would really not want anthropologists around.
Hello, nice to see everyone. I'm Ricardo Faguaga from Mexico. So the situation the house anthropology in Mexico, it's kind of difficult for several reasons that have been mentioned here or shared here. One is that we have a big budget cut to science in general. And I remember mentioning this in Florianopolis. I was talking this, I think, with Carmen and some other colleagues, I think from the Philippines and from different parts of the world, of saying like, well, we always hope for the best, of saying like, at least we will have a small amount of money to at least do some research. But since last year, the Mexican government has already decided to cut funding to science in general. And as well, we know social sciences and humanities have very little money of all that bulk of money. That's one of the things. The other thing that we have been seeing in anthropology here in Mexico, it's a problem about safety and violence. Now, not since last year, in the last decade, there's a lot of violence in different field sites and field work that makes almost impossible to go to do any field work to specific regions of Mexico or to talk to specific groups. On the other hand, people have been very creative in trying to do the field work, but still, we have those kind of problems. And probably another issue about the Mexican anthropology is how we're dealing, with politics. So as everyone knows, there's a new political party, a new regime, a new beginning, some might say. And still we're looking, or some people are trying to figure out how things are going to be. And by this, I mean, let me put you an example, is like in the probably last month, we had, about the Mexican government is promoting and probably building a train in the Maya Peninsula. So there's a very divided or a very well-known divided opinion among anthropologists that about that project. So there's a group of anthropologists who are promoting and helping to create and build this train, and there's another group of anthropologists against the project. And of course, these two groups are, well, they're trying to dialogue, but most of the time it's an issue about ethics, like should anthropologists be working for the state, especially in these conditions? And here's the other thing that a lot of people say, like, well, he or she is a specialist, so we should hear them. And they are translating, kind of quote, they're translating what people think. And they are saying that this train is a great option. And some people say, like, no, you're making a very small, a very small amount of interviews, or there should be some other way of knowing. So this train is dividing our anthropological community, I think, in a good sense, and putting in the table an issue about ethics. How are we working in the Mexican anthropological issues? How we're working with, major actors that will be the Mexican government at some point, or, international or foreign industries. So that's what we're seeing here in Mexico, at least from my perspective. And probably it's also from, well, I don't know if sharing that from a Latin American perspective. We also have the issues of human rights, especially a lot of violence against women, violence against indigenous women, and how do you say that? It's not prosecution. Like, there's a lot of people disappearing, especially social activists in different regions. So anthropologists, they have a lot of work. The problem is, like, when we're losing at some point the public legitimacy of specific issues of society. A lot of people are, kind of in love of big data, kind of what economists or political scientists are doing. And it's very interesting how it works. The problem and that's probably a problem for Mexican anthropology, is like that transition, not to big data, but how to translate to a new and broader audience our findings, our own, and our own anthropologists. So a lot of people, the public or the lay, or how do you say, like, there's the big citizens or lay people, as they say in some science. They think that Mexican anthropologists are the ones who are, kind of Indiana Jones in the pyramids, or looking for stones, or for lost societies. And very few people know that Mexican anthropologists have a lot of impact in the 70s and the 80s and in the beginning of the 90s in promoting certain specific, I'm going to say, programs from the government to improve social conditions. I'm not saying it's good or wrong. I'm just saying that anthropologists were in the center of the debate that goes from it's important to eat native maize, and through going through why it's vital to have drinkable water. So now anthropology is not in that debate. We're pushing hard with other social scientists for a different agenda, but it's difficult at some point because we don't have a platform. Although we have a lot of PhDs, and that's the other issue. We have a lot of PhDs in social anthropology, that they have a lot of extremely interesting topics and research and impact, but they don't have jobs because there's no money. So that's the other issue. And here in Mexico, there's no tradition of the professional, non-academic anthropology. So we're facing a very great, I'm not going to say threat, but a problem of how to deal with this day to day when we don't have, money from the government, when, national or or international companies are not interested in Mexican anthropologies, and I'm not even saying applied anthropology. And we have great anthropological programs, that are growing and, doing a lot of interesting stuff. We have a lot of books, but there's no money. And that's a problem, how we're gonna deal with the visibility of the different kind of national anthropologists in Mexico, or different traditions. There's no one. So there's my point of view. Thank you, and hello to everyone.
Thank you, Ricardo. I guess now maybe to open it up, because we haven't heard much from our European colleagues. Before COVID, we had issues with Hungary and Poland, etc. So perhaps we can ask some of our other colleagues, since I guess who want to share their perspectives.
Just one thing, one interesting question that you point is that regarding about anthropologist engagement and national narratives or state narratives. For me, it's rather difficult to measure that idea, no matter what we do, but also how our discourses construct national ideas. So it's rather hard. So sorry, I'm with my.
Okay, let's see.
Here, so
this is the new.
But I'm listening. So that's.
All right.
Thank you, Mariano. We have a new generation of anthropologists. So Giovanna is there. Would you like to say something? Yes.
Yeah, hi to everybody. I wanted to be only a listener, but I see that you would like me to tell something to you about Italy. Yes. Do you hear me? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So I am from your audience. And I am an independent researcher. I retired from the Italian Ministry of Education 7 years ago. And now I am giving my collaboration to the IUAES. I think that education is very, very important to spread anthropology. I worked in the Ministry of Education for many years, and my work is to coordinate, above all, international citizenship, cultural exchanges with many universities, above all in Lombardy. We had 11 universities, and also with the European and international institutes. So I think that anthropology must become more visible. And we, step by step, also in Italy, we have tried to reach this aim. And for example, in the initial training of teachers as an anthropology study for everybody. So even if in primary schools, teachers know what anthropology is. And we have inserted anthropology in many curricula. And also, even if sometimes it's not, also in social science lycée, I did a lot for this in Italy. And so now I think that anthropology must become more visible, even if in Italy we have done a lot. I think must become more visible because sometimes it is hidden by psychology, sociology, languages, and other human sciences.
Yeah, you asked me to tell something briefly about Belgium and Europe. About Belgium, I can be rather brief, but it is an interesting case because most of you are based in countries where anthropology has a representation in terms of having an association. And it's always interesting to also consider the places where there is no association. And so Belgium has no association, so Belgium is also not represented at WCAA. And so this is, of course, a very different point of view, because whatever issues we may have in Belgium as anthropologists, we have to look elsewhere for representation, because as anthropologists, we are not being represented anywhere. But I can actually make a very similar point, but from a different angle about Europe. Many of the issues that I have heard you talk about are not exclusive problems for anthropology. Many of our sister disciplines have those issues too. And so if we want to achieve something, oftentimes also it will not be about defending anthropology, but defending social sciences and defending social sciences and humanities. And this is actually what in Europe they have understood for quite some time now. EASA has been quite active in the background and in lobby groups. They started doing that in the new millennium from the perspective of defending anthropology, but they soon realized that this didn't make any sense whatsoever, and that they had to make larger associations. And so there is now in Europe, there is an alliance, the European Alliance for Social Sciences and Humanities, where together basically this alliance lobbies for issues that are considered important within the social sciences and humanities. But of course, yeah, this means fighting for whatever things you think are a priority. But one of the things is also, and this is maybe speaking also to the previous speaker, many of us have a kind of a luxury position in the sense that, and many anthropologists actually, that we choose the topics that we find important to study and to teach about, but particularly in terms of research. And I've been saying for quite some time now that if we want to have some influence outside of our discipline, we also need to tap into the priorities that are being set by other bodies. And I'm thinking of UN, I'm thinking of EU. And so like we have, the Sustainable Development Goals and all these things, they are not set by us. And we can criticize, we can analyze and critically analyze what is our about and all the negative things. But if we want to have a say, and if our expertise wants to be taken seriously, we also need to very seriously engage with those global or regional research agendas. And anthropology is very much absent on these scales. And so I've been arguing for quite some time now that this would be a very good way to actually leverage anthropological expertise and to show that it's not just a discourse that anthropology is important, that we can actually also deliver it. I think I will leave that at this.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Noel. Now, there's a discussion going on the chat that perhaps Gordon wants to take up lively, which is the issue of critical thinking being just defined in context and not as a sense. So Gordon, you wanted to answer to Leah on this question, please?
Yeah, Leah, and we have time so you can answer back, and I hope you will, because there's no one right or wrong here. You said in your comment here that it's not really possible to think of critical thinking as a universal because it doesn't mean the same everywhere and to everyone. Now, you are certainly right in terms of the content, but in terms of a method of critical thinking, no, I think it is universal. And let me offer a definition and see what you'll say about it. We have Bourdieuian habitus, all of us, which to me, Becker also talked about this, Ernest Becker, it's the stuff that we take so sacred that we can't question it. I see anthropology's obligation as bringing this to light. Now, this can be religion, it can be faith in capitalism, it can be faith in country, it can be faith in money. I mean, I used to regularly rip up money in front of my students until I got punched in the stomach for it. This is a way of really challenging at all that is taken for granted. Now, this doesn't mean to dismiss it. It means to bring it to light so that we can talk about it and think about its value, not in a taken for granted sense, but in a rational sense. Now, the content of what's taken for granted will differ from place to place. In most European societies, God is not something people think about, but in many other societies in the world, God or Allah is fundamental. So it will differ in content, but in terms of basic method, bringing up Borgian habitus to consciousness and questioning everything. I think that's a universal matter.
Yes, I agree, Gordon. I think I was trying to say the same that you're saying now, because
That's no fun.
when you intervene, and Virginia also, I understood that you were implying that anthropology should talk or should do research about certain things.
No.
And that was what was an essence of anthropology.
Yeah, I don't.
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead. I don't think that was what I was implying. I also don't think that's what he was implying, but it's interesting that that's what you heard.
But because of the discussion of the primatologist that Junji was talking about,
right?
And the discussion if that was anthropology or if that was not anthropology. Here in Argentina, I am editing a book now with my beloved colleague Rosana Guber about anthropologists made in Argentina, and I am discovering different kinds of things that were written, said, and done in name of anthropology.
Right.
So, my question was, who has the power to, who has the power to define what anthropology is and what anthropology should say, should do, should research? That was my question.
But I'm looking at your chat. What you actually, I was going to say, because it's a great question. You ended your comment, 9:25 here. Who has the power to define what critical thinking means? That's a little different, I think, from the question you just posed. Who has the power to define what anthropology is?
Well, Virginia, my English is not that good. Me expreso
I
mucho mejor en castellano, quizás en
can
castellano puedo decir mucho
translate if you
mejor.
want.
But
I can translate, say it in Spanish. I can translate.
No, but that en castellano me puedo expresar mucho mejor. My question was that who has the power to say what anthropology should be, should say, should research, should think, what should put in, what should articulate as critical thinking?
Yeah, good question. Before leaving, Leah, please explain the photo. Explain the green bracelet.
Yeah, the photo.
Those are my sister, my niece, and my arm with a green pañuelo.
Scarf.
That means we are fighting to have a legal abortion in Argentina.
And I guess, Leah, I'd still say then that you're right, who has the power to do it? I would say that any political view is not something that, as all anthropologists, we should necessarily follow, because those are going to vary. However, maybe as a basic motto of anthropology, it could be question everything. I think that's something we can agree upon.
No,
right?
but I am not discussing that motto, that essence. I am questioning what everything means. My question is what everything means. We have to question everything. Yes, I agree with that. But what everything is defined in context.
Yes. But okay, let me throw in a little twist. Maybe this fits in and maybe it doesn't work everywhere, but the question is great. But I would say, who has the power to define anthropology is a great question, but it's a particularly interesting question when we think there are lots of possibilities. One is people in political power define anthropology a certain way, or the kind of anthropology they want to see. People who are protesting, as Gordon knows well, will define anthropology in a way. I think that's true of probably most disciplines and not all disciplines. But I think what at least some of us are saying here, Noel, Gordon, maybe even, let's see, Giovanna, maybe what's they're saying is, okay, so other institutions and governments and politicians are defining it in a certain way, but we don't want to just let them define anthropology. We want to actively define anthropology in different ways.
Yes. But let me also have a word on that, because I think the question that Clara is posing is very important. Up to recent times in Brazil, everything what we want to study was defined by the anthropologists ourselves.
Right.
Now we have to look for funds, for money, and these are things that are defined by the government. So if we need to apply for a program that's already decided by the government, it's not us that are deciding what we are going to study. In Hungarian, the word gender was abolished. So if the anthropologists want to study gender relationship, they cannot do this. They are not going to be allowed to. And in Poland, even the word anthropology, it's not in the title of the courses anymore. The courses is on religion or something like that. Michel knows better than I because he wrote a statement about that. So I think that what Leah is saying is the conservatism, the rise of the conservatism in the many countries are changing what anthropologists can and cannot do it.
Okay, Carmen, but I may be a little bit more like Ed Lebo than I stated or than you are. I understand your point. It's very well put. On the other hand, I'm also thinking about groups of anthropologists who are fighting back, and ABBA is a very good example. You may not be able to apply for funds from certain institutions, but maybe there are other things we can do. Maybe we can approach some private foundations or other people who are also not happy with what those government institutions are doing or saying. So, you know, I don't think this is a matter of just giving up. I don't think anybody is saying we should give up, but I think we need to be creative about ways in which we continue to do what we value.
No, of course, anthropologists are very good tricksters. We also find our ways, but
that's also why these associations like WCAA or our national associations are so important.
Yeah. Okay, but on the other side of all of this, I'm going to be pessimistic now. I don't know that we are all fighting enough. I think EASA is a good example. I think AAA could do more. I know Ed has left. And AAA is trying to partner with various other associations. The issue in the US as well is, again, not just anthropology, but anything humanistic or seen as humanistic. I don't know that most of us are doing enough, whether through our institutions or our official associations. I would like us to do more.
The question is, in a sense, isn't the whole, I guess, academic freedom and critical thinking is when we have the possibility to debate what anthropology is. Because in the Soviet Union, anthropology was really ethnography, and ethnography was folklore because you did not want to challenge the state narrative. You wanted to follow, in a sense, like a state imperatives, and to this day, it's somewhat hard for people to move out of this structure. So I think we have to do more. We have to make sure that we don't fall into the trap of doing what states want, because that will, in a sense, I guess, will not help us, our discipline, or the population, the peoples, I guess, that we work with. So